Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Spark Learning Lab's Facebook Live event. Today, we will again be focusing on the newly released Build, Learn, Grow Stabilization Grant, which is a new funding stream available to help both early education and out-of-school time programs rebuild and strengthen their programs. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Bachman, and I am the director of Spark Learning Lab. Spark is providing multiple tiers of technical assistance to programs throughout the grant period. We will continue that today with this next episode of our Facebook Live series that delves more deeply into the Build, Learn, Grow Stabilization Grant for both our centers and our registered ministries. We do want this session to be interactive, so if at any time you have questions or comments, please post those. As always, our communications manager, Darcy Marlett, and we are also excited to be joined by our business specialist, Lisa Metler. They are monitoring the posts and will let me know if there's anything we can address on the air. If we are unable to address your specific comments or questions today, we will be sure to address them in future Facebook Live events or through the frequently asked questions on the Build, Learn, Grow website. Today, again, we are focused specifically on our centers and our ministry programs and the questions we have received pertinent to your businesses. So let's go ahead and jump in. We will start with some questions around allowable expenses. Now remember that grant funds can be used for things like personnel costs related to hiring, compensating, training, or retaining your staff, health and safety training like CPR and first aid, COVID-19 safety-related needs to keep staff and children safe, any goods or services that are necessary to resume and or strengthen your operations, mental health supports such as counseling for children and employees, and facility fees like rent, mortgages, utilities, or improvements or maintenance to your program. Remember that you can find the allowable expenses guide, which can support you in understanding everything that you can spend the grant dollars on the Build, Learn, Grow website. So our first set of questions is around personnel costs. And our first question is, can the grant dollars be used for retirement? Yes, it can. In fact, by putting 25% or more of the awarded grant dollars towards retirement or retirement for your employees, you are not only using the funds for an allowable expense, but you are also meeting the grant requirement that states, my program will invest at least 25% of awarded funds toward increasing staff wages or benefits. The next question is whether bonuses are an allowable expense. And the answer here is yes. Again, the grant requires that 25% of the awarded grant be used to increase salaries and benefits, giving your staff and yourself a bonus that totals 25% or more of the grant award is allowable and meets this grant requirement. However, Spark and the Office of Early Childhood and Out-of-School Learning do strongly encourage you to further consider increasing base salaries or wages rather than providing a bonus. Remember that a one-time bonus may not provide your employees the financial stability or the recognition that they need to remain employed by your program. In order to maintain staff, it is important to have competitive wages. Think about how you might use the grant award to pay other operating expenses, like a mortgage or some other terminating expense, which then could free up dollars in your operational budget to support higher wages on an ongoing basis. So yes, you can give bonuses, but it might be important for you to take some time to really think about, instead of a bonus, is there a way that I can increase those base wages, those base salaries, so that my team, my staff are getting the recognition that they deserve as long as they are employed, rather than just a one-time or a once every month bonus for the length of the grant. The third set of questions in this category are some that we have received often. Can the grant cover pay raises that have been given in the past? Does the grant cover existing staff wages or just raises? The answer to this question is a yes and a no. According to the allowable expense guide that can be found on the Build, Learn, Grow website, the grant can be used to cover existing staff wages and salaries. However, the dollars that you put toward paying existing wages and salaries, even if you give a raise or a bonus or gave a raise or a bonus in the last year, does not count towards the 25% that must be invested in further increasing staff wages and benefits. So yes, the grant can cover current staff wages, and your current staff wages does include any pay raises that you might have given in the last year. But on top of that, you also have to use 25% of your grant award to increase staff wages and benefits. We're really getting down into the weeds now. It might feel like a little bit of semantics, but hoping that this information does provide you some clarity. Again, be sure to drop any questions or comments and post those so that we're sure to address those that we can, and those that we cannot today, we will do so in the future. Now let's check in on some questions around allowable expenses for goods and services necessary to resume and strengthen your operations. The first question is one I appreciate because, very honestly, it's so straightforward. Can the dollars be used to purchase food? The answer is yes. Again, our source is the Allowable Expenses Guide found on the Build, Learn, Grow website. The guide tells us that food and beverage services for program-provided meals are an allowable expense. Furthermore, the guide states that materials to run a childcare business are allowable. This means that if you need materials such as plates, cups, plastic forks, plastic spoons, utensils, etc., to feed the children, these would also be an allowable expense. Next is a question that came specifically from one of our registered ministries. As registered ministries are not required to have a fire alarm system for registration, but do need one to become part of the voluntarily certified, which is necessary for PTQ enrollment. So one of our ministries asked, is a fire alarm system an allowable expense? As you may remember from previous Facebook Live events, the Administration for Children and Families guidance states that minor renovations are allowable as long as the renovation does not meet the definition of major renovation, which includes structural changes to the foundation, roof, floor, exterior, or load-bearing walls of a facility, or the extension of a facility to increase its floor area, or extensive alteration of a facility such as to significantly change its function and purpose, even if such renovation does not include any structural changes. So in looking at that definition of major renovation, yes, adding a fire alarm system to the registered ministry is an allowable improvement to increase the health and safety for the children and staff of the program, as long as doing so does not meet the definition of major renovation. Spark received a question about investing the grant dollars and then using the return from that investment to support ongoing operational costs. In previous Facebook Live events, we have discussed how programs can use the grant dollars to free up operational funds that they can then use in other ways. So it is with investing. Our recommendation would be to use the grant dollars to pay off things such as your mortgage, to support your current staffing costs or utilities, etc., any of those allowable expenses, and document for audit that the grant was used for these allowable purchases. Then take the operational dollars that you would have spent on these items and invest them. In this way, you are sure to have expended the grant on allowable expenses and have an investment that can support your operational costs in the future. The key here is in the documentation. You must make sure that you have receipts, invoices, etc., from allowable expenses that total the grant amount. So can I invest the grant dollars and then use the return to support ongoing expenses? Spark would encourage you to use the grant dollars on other allowable expenses and use the savings from those to invest. The next set of questions have been about the actual application process. First, let's talk through quickly what the application structure looks like. So when you go into the online application form, which is also mobile friendly and is found in iLead, the first thing you'll come to is program information, where you are asked to review basic information, including your program address, your program type, whether you are a center or a ministry, and the administrator contact information, and to confirm that you meet the related eligibility requirements for the grant. Next, you will enter enrollment and staffing information for your program. This information is going to include age groups served by classroom, the typical number of staff present at one time, the average attendance, and your maximum capacity. We understand that for registered ministries, you have a suggested capacity, and that is a bit different than the licensed required capacity. So just keep in mind there. Then you'll come to your expenses page. On this page, you'll be presented with an estimated grant award to support your monthly operating expenses. The total considers each provider's program type, your average attendance, your staffing costs, your quality level, and where you're located in the state. Next, you will enter your banking information to establish direct deposit for receiving grant funds. If you are a center or a ministry that is already has direct deposit set up, then you will simply review and confirm that the information is correct on your screen. Next, you'll look at the support categories, where you're going to review all of the allowable expenses that we addressed earlier, and you will check a box to indicate how you plan to use the dollars. Again, this is how you intend to use them, not how you actually do. So you would check every box where you plan or you're thinking that you will spend some of the grant dollars. Then finally, the agreements. You'll review the grant requirements and confirm that you understand and plan to adhere to them during the grant period. So these are the 6 sections that you move through in the application process. We've received some questions around the various parts of this application that we'll now address. So let's start with the enrollment counts. A great question that we received during a previous Facebook Live event is specific to registered ministries who do not have a required capacity. The question is, if you are a ministry and you are over the suggested capacity, can you use those enrollment numbers? Remember that the application asks for your average daily attendance. The Build, Learn, Grow Stabilization worksheet that's found on the Build, Learn, Grow Stabilization website provides the following guidance in determining this figure for each of your classrooms. It says, average classroom attendance is the number of slots available in your classroom that are typically occupied. So when completing the application, registered ministries should follow this guidance and include the number of slots that you have determined for your classroom that are then typically occupied by a child. For ministries, the number of available slots is determined by you as the program, not by licensing, because those are suggested requirements. Now, again, this is true for registered ministries, not certified registered ministries. If you are a VCP or part of the voluntary certification program, then you do have requirements in terms of how many children can be in a classroom based on square footage, ratio, and those other factors that determine that. So for registered ministries, if the number of available slots typically occupied is more than the suggested capacity, this should be recorded in the application. So we hope that that helps to address the question. If you are a ministry and you have a suggested capacity and you are over the suggested capacity, can you use those enrollment numbers? You need to determine your average classroom attendance as the guidance suggests on the worksheet, and then be sure to record that number in the application. Some questions that we have received about expenses and how the grant is calculated are, does PTQ impact the estimated grant award amount? There are several factors that are included when determining how much it costs to care for and educate a child. One of those factors is quality. Research has shown again and again that higher quality programming is more costly to operate than lower quality programming. In Indiana, our state uses paths to quality as a way of recognizing the quality of a program. While a program may be high quality and choose to not be on paths to quality, there is no way for the state to assess that quality without paths to quality participation. So if you're not on paths to quality, there's no way for the state to assess how high quality your program is. So paths to quality rating is used to gauge the quality of a program in Indiana. Quality is a factor that determines the cost of care and education. Cost of care and education of a child is a determinant in your monthly expenses, right? Because the higher the quality, the more it costs for each child to be cared for and educated, which means the monthly expenses would be higher. And the grant pays 3 times your monthly expenses. So the answer to this question is yes. Paths to quality participation and level do impact the estimated grant amount, and it may make better business sense to enroll in paths to quality, or if your program is planning to advance before December 30th of 2021, to wait until you are enrolled or you are the highest level possible to actually submit the grant. Second, we have been asked about the guidance that we gave about talking to a financial expert before submitting your grant. The question is, if we need to talk to a financial expert before filling out the application, how do we know the amount we will receive to base the advice on? According to the frequently asked questions on the Build, Learn, Grow website, providers can start an application, save, and come back later to submit it. With this in mind, a center or ministry could complete the application up until this point in the process, the expense point in the process. They can then write down the estimated grant award, save, leave, go speak to your accountant or other financial expert to make a plan for the dollars, and then come back later to submit. So in this way, you would actually be able to see what your estimated grant amount is, and before accepting it, go talk to a financial expert or a tax preparer or whomever you need to make a plan for those dollars, then come back in and submit the application later. We were also asked if any documentation is required to be scanned and uploaded when completing the application. The answer to this is maybe. As presented earlier, in the expenses portion of the application, you will be provided an estimated award amount and 2 choices. You can either accept that the estimated award amount is in line with your monthly expenses, or you can decline it. If you choose to decline, meaning that you believe the estimated award does not accurately reflect your monthly expenses, at that time, you would be asked to upload further documentation for consideration. Once uploaded, your application goes into a queue and you will be contacted to discuss your program's unique needs more before a final grant award is determined and your application is approved. So is any other documentation required when completing the application? Maybe. If the presented estimated grant award is in line with your monthly expenses, then you should not need to upload anything further. If it is not, then you may be asked to upload more documentation about your specific situation. Finally, we were asked if a program is located inside of a public or private school, what expenses are included? For the best answer, Spark and the Office of Early Childhood and Out-of-School Learning recommend that you speak to your financial expert, but there is some general guidance that we can provide. When completing the application, you are asked to provide information about the classrooms and expenses related to the licensed or registered portion of the program. With this being said, you will only include the classroom attendance, enrollment, and staffing information for those areas of your program that are licensed or registered. For other expenses, your financial expert should be able to provide you an equation by which you can determine any other shared costs to estimate your monthly expenses. So yes, when you, if your program is located in a public or private school that serves children that are not in the licensed or registered portion of the program, there are some expenses from the whole program that can be included. However, it might not be all of the expenses. A portion of your utilities bill is being used for those licensed or registered classrooms. A portion of your rent or of your mortgage is being used for those classrooms, while some of it or the rest of it is being used to serve those classrooms that are not licensed or registered. You can include those expenses from the whole program that are allocated to your registered or licensed portion. You cannot include the expenses that are allocated to serve non-licensed, non-registered portions of your program that's in the public or private school area. Again, getting into the weeds here. That's why we wanted to really talk to this audience of licensed centers and registered ministries to answer your specific questions. But please be sure to post any questions or comments, and we'll be sure to address those either today or in the near future. So the final piece around the application structure that we'll talk about is the agreements. Now, if you were with us for our last Facebook event that included our centers and our ministries, we spent an entire hour looking at the grant requirements and the provider agreements that are required for this grant. The Build, Learn, Grow partners have created a helpful resource so you can review the requirements of the stabilization grant before you get into the application. The resource can be found in both MySpark Learning Lab and on the Build, Learn, Grow Stabilization website. So the first agreement that we want to look at that we've received some questions around is this one. My program will invest at least 25% of awarded funds towards increasing staff wages or benefits. Note, providers may not use these awarded funds to supplant or replace existing costs, but rather must invest in new wage and benefit enhancements. This requirement does not apply to local educational agencies or LEAs. So registered ministries, licensed centers, this does apply to you. It does not apply to our LEAs and those programs that are operated by an LEA. So we have received the question, but if these funds pay payroll expenses, then we could use what we usually use to pay payroll for expansion. The answer to this takes a little bit of explaining. Remember that you are required to spend 25% of the funds on increasing staff wages and benefits. So if you documented that 100% of the grant was used to pay current employees, including yourself as the director or owner, then used what you would have put towards wages to increase the staff wages, you actually did not meet this requirement. In order to meet this requirement, you must document for audit that 25% of the grant award was used to increase staff wages and benefits. Then you can use up to 75% of the rest of the grant for other requirements, other allowable expenses, or to further increase wages and benefits in your program. Second, could a center or ministry use the grant to pay a mortgage for for up to 3 months so we can raise our employee wages? Again, this is the same concept. You must use 25% of the grant to increase staff wages and benefits. You can use up to 75% of the awarded grant to pay for any other allowable expenses, including a mortgage. Then use the money that you would have spent on the mortgage to further increase wages and benefits, or to support the ongoing costs of these increased wages and benefits. So remember that you have to document through audit that 25%, at least 25% of the grant was used to increase staff wages or benefits. Then you can use the other 75% how you see fit. You could use 100% to increase. You could use the other 75% to pay off a terminating expense and use what you would have paid on that terminating expense to further increase staff wages or to pay your ongoing charges, whatever that might be. But 25%, at least 25%, has to be documented for audit as increasing staff wages or benefits or benefits. The final questions around documentation and pertain to these agreements. My program will follow all required tracking and reporting, including maintaining financial documentation for purposes of audits. My program will not utilize these funds to pay outstanding taxes. My program will not utilize funds to pay for expenses already covered by other federal, state, or local relief funds or grants. So the first question pertaining to these agreements: will we need to upload any spreadsheets or reports like payroll liability reports? As we have discussed in previous Facebook Live events and earlier today in this event, there will be a report that is required to be completed before you submit for another round of funding. What that report requires is yet to be determined. As soon as we know, we will let you know. But today, we cannot say whether you will be required to upload any documents. However, you are required per this first agreement to keep all documents pertaining to how you spent these funds for 5 years. So even if you don't have to upload it for the purpose of reporting, you do need to have proof of how you spent these dollars on hand in your program for 5 years in case you are ever audited. Another question: how do we reimburse back to January 31st of 2020? So remember that the full grant period is January 31, 2020 to September 30th of 2023. So this question is asking, how do we document back things that we might have spent back in January? So this grant is not a reimbursable grant, first and foremost. So how do we reimburse from January 2020? This is not a reimbursable grant. You are not submitting receipts and then getting paid for what you spent. You are getting a lump sum based on your monthly expenses. In order to meet the audit requirements for purchases made prior to the grant being awarded, so prior to you actually getting the money, you will need to have a proof of purchase for an item or items that are allowable under the grant and that are dated January 31st, 2020 through September 30th, 2023. So how do you use dollars going back to January 31st of 2020 or anything prior to when you received the award? You just have to have a receipt for the item or items that are actually an allowable expense under the grant, and it must be dated in the grant period, January 31st, 2020 through September 30th, 2023. Finally, we have been asked about other funding sources. So when we think about the last agreement that's on your screen here, for instance, what if I already received a PPP loan or a Paycheck Protection Program loan? Having received other federal funding throughout the pandemic does not exclude you from being eligible for the stabilization grants. But as the third agreement on your screen states, you cannot utilize the stabilization grant dollars to pay for things that other grants have paid for. For instance, if you used another grant to purchase masks and hand sanitizer in March of 2021, you cannot use those same receipts to document spending these dollars for the stabilization grant. Now, you can purchase more masks and more hand sanitizer if you need it, but you cannot use the same purchases for two different grants. The last questions that we have prepared responses for today are around taxes. Taxes have been a hot topic as there's been a lot of confusion around what kind of taxes can the grant actually paid for. So to clarify some misinformation that is out there, the grant requirement states that the grant cannot be used for outstanding taxes. You see that through the middle of your screen. This means taxes that were not paid off from previous years, also sometimes referred to as back taxes. Moving forward, if, for instance, your business has to pay taxes in April of 2022 because you received this grant as income in October of 2021, the stabilization grant dollars can be used to pay those taxes. They could not be used to pay taxes that you incurred in 2019 or in 2020. Anything moving forward, however, you could use the stabilization grant dollars to pay. Now, we also received some questions from our nonprofit friends, because I know there's many centers and registered ministries who are on the call today that are 501c3 nonprofit or tax exempt organizations. For you all, we do ask that you direct any of your questions to your tax preparer, your accountant, or your financial expert, as the specifics of your program being a nonprofit are very specific when it comes to your tax situation. So it's always best to go to the experts, and we do not want to provide you any inappropriate or incorrect information. So our 501c3s, our tax exempt friends out there, please be sure to direct your questions around what are the tax implications or what can we use these dollars for in terms of taxes to your tax preparer, your accountant, or your financial expert. So those are all the questions that we've received in our previous Facebook Live events and through our help desk, as well as through our partners from our centers and our registered ministries throughout the state, at least thus far. I have a feeling that some others have come in today. So Darcy, I would invite you to come on. And are there any other questions that have come through that we would be able to answer today?
Yeah, we have a few questions for the good of the group. Sherry asked, we are a registered ministry. We do not participate in PTQ. Is that a requirement in order to apply?
Great question, Sherry. So no, PAS equality participation is not a requirement to apply. So you are still eligible for the grant as long as your registration is in good standing, as long as you are currently open and serving children, and your registration was, you had your registration on or before March 11th of 2021. Those are the only three requirements for the grant. So you are eligible to apply.
Thanks, Mike. Also on PTQ, Jennifer asked, can we start PTQ now to get additional funding?
I guess it depends, Jennifer, on where you are in the grant application process. So if you have already submitted your grant application and it is approved, then that means that your payment is in process. So joining PAS Equality today would not change the amount that you are going to receive in this first round of funding. However, if you do choose to participate and enroll in PAS Equality today, that would impact the funding that you would receive in the next round, which we expect to be open January through March of 2022. If you have not yet applied or you are in the process of applying, then yes, enrolling in PAS Equality and changing your demographic information to show that you are a level 1 or higher in PAS Equality can impact the estimated grant award that you will receive.
Thanks, Mike, for the additional information on that. Matthew asked, may funds be used to pay extra principal on an existing mortgage?
That's a very good question, Matthew. Yes, it can. So you can, one of the allowable expenses for this grant, for the stabilization grant, are facility fees, and under facility fees is mortgage. So you can use the up to 75%, because remember 25% you want to make sure you're using to increase those staff wages and benefits. You want to be thinking about any tax implications, if there are tax implications for you, and is there any kind of money that you want to reserve for those things. But whatever is left, you could use to pay off additional principal of your mortgage.
Thank you. We have a couple more on allowable expenses.
Great.
Jody asked, what about replacing pea gravel with ground covering that makes our playground inclusive?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we've also received often. So under the facility fees, improvements, and maintenance, you will see in the allowable expenses guide that playground improvements are considered an allowable expense. As long as, again, it does not meet the definition of major renovations. So go back and listen again to that definition of major renovations. It doesn't sound like you're tearing down any load-bearing walls. It doesn't sound like you are expanding or changing the purpose of your building. So by putting down a new ground cover that is safer for the children to play on, yes, that would be an allowable expense for this grant.
All right, one more on allowable expenses. Jameson asked, can you purchase a passenger van for summer camp?
Jameson, that is a very good question. And that is one that I'm going to go back and get an answer for you on. I have heard a couple of different answers to that, and there are some specifics around transportation. I can tell you that in the guidance that comes from the Administration of Children and Families, there is an allowable expense around supporting staff transportation to and from work. However, I don't remember anything in the guidance around purchasing a vehicle or transportation as an allowable expense. So let me go back, do some more research, and we will be sure that that is either included in a future Facebook Live event that we post in this Facebook Live event, a response to you, right? Or it will be on the FAQs, the frequently asked questions on the Build, Learn, Grow website.
Thanks, Mike. On staff expenses, Tina asked, we do not offer paid sick days. If we offer each employee 5 paid sick days, can we calculate the amount that this will cost and call that a new benefit to apply towards the 25%?
Yes, 100%, Tina. And thank you so much for thinking creatively about staff wages and benefits, because that is a benefit. So if you are not currently offering paid time off, vacation time, sick time, bereavement, any of these things, and you find a way to include that now as a benefit and use this, the Child Care Stabilization Award to support that, that is a new benefit that you are adding to for your staff and would be an allowable expense. Now, in terms of the actual documentation that you need for audit, I would strongly encourage you to talk to your tax preparer, talk to one of your financial experts to think through exactly what you would need to document for that. But that is an allowable expense, and you can think that way.
Thank you, Mike. Sherry asked, who could she speak to regarding a rejected submission?
Sure. Sherry, what you'll want to do is contact, oh, and I just blanked on the email. Sherry, I will get that email and I will we'll make sure that we post that in Facebook, because there is an email that you can send any of your questions to if there's anything wrong with the application, or if for some reason your application was rejected. My apologies that I don't have that right in front of me.
Thank you, Mike. Do we have time for a couple more?
Sure.
All right. Jody asked, just to clarify, I gave a raise to keep employees this year. Can I count that increase as part of my 25%?
So sadly, you cannot. So remember that and if you have given a raise to your staff previously, even if it's within the grant period, then you have already demonstrated by continually paying that wage that you are able to support that wage on an ongoing basis. So you are not actually increasing what your wages and benefits. You did increase. So you can use up to 75% of the grant to support your current wages, which is that increased wage that you gave earlier this year. but you cannot include that towards your 25%. Your 25% needs to go above and beyond that increase or add some kind of new benefit.
Right, we have one more general one. Reed asked, sorry if I missed it, but can grant funds be used to purchase educational technology such as computers and tablets?
Yes, yes, I can, Reed. So that would fall in our bucket around the goods and materials to support you in resuming and or strengthening your business. And so if you need to purchase any kind of educational materials, be it technology or otherwise, that would be an allowable expense. And I would say, if you are purchasing new technology, you're probably going to need internet. So under the facility fees, which includes things like utilities, you could use the dollars also to support your internet costs.
Thanks so much, Mike. And thank you to Lisa, who's answering questions in the chat as well. Mike, on the next slide, is also going to give you some information for where you can reach out if you'd like to talk to somebody live to have questions answered. We'll continue to answer questions in the chat as we go along, but we also have a lot of great resources for you to check out or call or send an email for help.
Thanks so much, Darcy. Yes. So if you want to learn more about the stabilization grants, Build, Learn, Grow stabilization grants, please go to stabilization.buildlearngrow.org. This is a website dedicated to the stabilization grants that is being updated on a regular basis. And when I say regular, I mean largely daily. It includes a vast list of frequently asked questions. Many of the questions that were posed today, you can find answers to there, as well as a wealth of resources, as Darcy mentioned, including webinars, video tutorials, and both the allowable expense guide and the worksheet that we talked about today to support you in completing your application and determining how you can best use the stabilization grant dollars. If you do have questions, you can connect with Spark Learning Lab live. Send us an email at help@indianaspark.com. Call us at 1-800-299-1627. If you're like me and you prefer to chat, chat is also available on indianaspark.com or in my Spark Learning Lab during our help desk hours. Finally, we do have one more scheduled Facebook Live event. This one is going to be specific to our LEA and school-based programs. So if you are a licensed center within a school, this will not so much be applicable to you. This is for our school-based exempt programs. And we will have specific information and questions that have been asked by those programs that we can address on Tuesday, October 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central. All Facebook Live events are recorded. We are posting those as we go along. As I said, this is our 4th Facebook Live event, and we have one more coming up, as well as some others that we are considering to do along the way to continue to support you with new information as it comes out about the Child Care Stabilization Grants. So all of those recordings, we are passing those on to our partners to put on the Build, Learn, Grow Stabilization Grant website. You can also find them on the indianaspark.com homepage. With that, on behalf of Darcy, Lisa, and all of Spark Learning Lab, I want to thank you all so much for being with us this afternoon. We do hope that this information has been helpful in you making an informed decision about whether or not the child care stabilization dollars are right for you and whether they are right for you today, as well as thinking about if you are waiting for your stabilization payments, thinking about how you might plan to use those dollars effectively, as well as meeting all of the grant requirements. If you do have any questions, please reach out. We also love your feedback. Have a wonderful afternoon. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you all.